The scream that tore through the narrow alley behind Henderson's General Store on that sweltering August afternoon in 1876 would change Willa Sutton's life forever, though she did not yet know it as she struggled against the expensive wool suit jacket that trapped her arms. Willa had come to Ardmore, Oklahoma Territory just 3 months prior with her widowed mother, seeking a fresh start after her father's death left them nearly penniless in St. Louis. The frontier town promised opportunity, and her mother had secured work as a seamstress, while Willa took a position at Henderson's, stocking shelves and managing inventory. At 22 years old, she had grown accustomed to hard work and long hours, but nothing had prepared her for the persistent, unwanted attention of Preston Worthington III. Preston was the only son of Gerald Worthington, who owned the First Bank of Ardmore and held mortgages on half the businesses in town. At 25, Preston had never worked a day in his life, spending his time gambling, drinking, and pursuing any woman who caught his fancy. For the past month, he had made Willa his primary target, following her through the store, making crude suggestions, and using his father's influence to ensure no one intervened. Today, he had finally cornered her. "Just one kiss, Miss Sutton," Preston slurred, his breath reeking of whiskey though it was barely past noon. His pale, soft hands gripped her shoulders as he pressed her against the rough wooden wall of the alley. His brown hair was slicked back with expensive pomade, and his clean-shaven face held an expression of entitled expectation that made Willa's stomach turn. "One little kiss, and I will tell my father to forgive the loan on your mother's shop. You want that, do not you?" "Let me go." Willa twisted hard, feeling splinters dig into her back through her simple cotton dress. She had only stepped out to fetch more stock from the back storage shed, never imagining Preston had been watching and waiting. "Mr. Henderson is expecting me back any moment." "Mr. Henderson will wait as long as I tell him to wait," Preston said, leaning closer. His fingers dug painfully into her arms. "My father owns his mortgage, too. Now stop being so difficult. All the girls in town would be grateful for my attention." "Then go find one of them," Willa spat, turning her face away as he tried to force his mouth onto hers. Her heart hammered against her ribs, and genuine fear began to override her anger. Preston had always been persistent, but today there was something different in his eyes, something more dangerous. "I said no." "And I say yes," Preston growled, using his weight to pin her more firmly. Despite his soft lifestyle, he was still larger and stronger than Willa's slender frame. "You're just a poor shop girl, and I am being generous. You should be thanking me." Willa drew breath to scream again when Preston suddenly jerked backward, yanked away from her as though plucked up by a giant's hand. She stumbled forward, catching herself against a barrel, and looked up to see the largest man she had ever encountered holding Preston by the scruff of his neck like a misbehaving puppy. The stranger stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly blocked the alley entrance. His arms, visible beneath rolled-up sleeves of a faded blue workshirt, were corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard physical labor. His hands, wrapped around Preston's expensive jacket, were massive and scarred. Long, dark brown hair hung past his collar, slightly wavy and clearly in need of a trim, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught Willa's attention, gray as a winter storm and currently blazing with barely controlled fury as he looked at Preston. "The lady said no," the stranger said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through Willa's chest. His accent marked him as educated despite his rugged appearance, each word precisely pronounced and heavy with threat. Preston's face had gone from flushed with drink and arousal to pale with fear. His feet dangled inches above the ground as the stranger held him effortlessly. "Do you know who I am?" Preston managed to choke out. "My father." "I do not care if your father is President Grant himself," the stranger interrupted, giving Preston a small shake that made the younger man's teeth rattle. "You are going to apologize to this woman. Then you are going to leave her alone. Forever." "You cannot tell me what to do." Preston's voice rose to an indignant squeak. "I will have the sheriff arrest you for assault. I will have my father." The stranger's expression did not change, but something in his eyes made Preston fall silent. "Apologize," he repeated, the single word somehow more threatening than any lengthy speech could have been. Preston swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He glanced at Willa, then quickly away. "I apologize for my behavior, Miss Sutton," he mumbled. "Louder!" the stranger demanded, And mean it?" "I apologize," Preston said more clearly, panic entering his voice. "It will not happen again. I swear it will not happen again." The stranger studied Preston for a long moment, then set him down with enough force that Preston stumbled and nearly fell. "If I hear that you have so much as looked at her wrong, I will come find you. Do you understand?" Preston nodded frantically, already backing toward the street. His expensive clothes were rumpled and dusty, his carefully styled hair falling across his forehead. Yes, I understand." He cast one more fearful glance at the stranger, then fled, practically running down the alley and disappearing around the corner. Silence fell, broken only by the distant sounds of the town going about its business and Willa's ragged breathing as the fear slowly drained from her body, leaving her shaking. The stranger turned to face her fully, and up close Willa could see more details. He had to be in his late 20s, his face tanned and weathered from sun and wind. A long scar ran along his left forearm, pale against his tanned skin. His clothes were worn but clean, and a hunting knife hung from his belt in a well-made leather sheath. Everything about him spoke of competence and quiet strength. "Are you all right, miss?" he asked, his voice gentler now but still carrying that deep, resonant quality. "Did he hurt you?" Willa shook her head, then found her voice. "No. Yes, I'm all right. Thank you." She pushed away from the barrel and tried to smooth her dress with trembling hands. "You appeared just in time. I do not know what I would have done if you had not been here." "You would have fought," the stranger said with certainty, a hint of approval in his tone. "I could see it in you, but you should not have had to." His jaw tightened. Men like that, who use their position to prey on women, they are lower than snakes. "Preston Worthington has been bothering me for weeks," Willa admitted, surprised to find herself confiding in this stranger. Something about his solid presence made her feel safe, protected. "But no one will do anything about it because his father owns half the town." The stranger's expression darkened. "Money does not give a man the right to force himself on a woman. Any man worth his salt knows that." "I wish more people shared your views." Willa looked up at him, really seeing him now that the immediate danger had passed. Despite his intimidating size and rough appearance, there was something in his eyes that spoke of decency, of honor. "I have not seen you in town before. Are you just passing through?" "I've been up in the mountains for the past 8 months, he said, gesturing vaguely north. "Trapping, hunting, living off the land. I came down for supplies." He paused, then seemed to remember his manners. "Name is Rafe Oakley." "Willa Sutton," she replied, managing a genuine smile despite her still racing heart. "And I am very grateful to have met you, Mr. Oakley, even under such circumstances." "Just Rafe," he said. "I've never been much for formalities." He studied her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "You are certain you are all right? Your hands are still shaking." Willa looked down and realized he was right. The aftermath of fear and adrenaline had left her trembling. "I will be fine. I just need a moment." "Take the time you need," Rafe said. He glanced around the alley, his expression thoughtful. "This happened behind your place of work?" "I work at Henderson's general store," Willa explained. "I came out to get stock from the storage shed, and Preston must have been watching. He followed me out and cornered me before I could get back inside." Rafe's hands curled into fists. "And your employer allows this?" "Mr. Henderson is a kind man, but he owes money to Preston's father," Willa said quietly. "If he angered the Worthingtons, he could lose everything. I told him not to worry about it, that I could handle Preston." She laughed bitterly. "I suppose today proved me wrong. Today proved that Preston Worthington is a coward who preys on women when he thinks no one is watching," Rafe corrected firmly. "Nothing more." The simple conviction in his words warmed something inside Willa's chest. She was accustomed to people making excuses for Preston, to being told she was overreacting or should feel flattered by his attention. Having someone, especially a man as formidable as Rafe, unequivocally take her side was novel and deeply appreciated. "I should get back inside," Willa said reluctantly. "Mr. Henderson really will be wondering where I've gone. But thank you again, Rafe, truly." "I will walk you to the door," Rafe said, falling into step beside her. His presence was like having a personal fortress, Willa thought. Preston would have to be insane to try anything with Rafe nearby. They walked the short distance to the back door of the general store, and Willa paused with her hand on the knob. "Will you be in town long?" "A few days at least," Rafe said. "I need to stock up on ammunition, salt, flour, other supplies I cannot make or find in the mountains." "Why?" Willa bit her lip, then made a decision. "Would you like to come to dinner tomorrow night? It is the least I can do to thank you, and my mother is an excellent cook. We do not have much, but what we have, we would be happy to share." Rafe looked surprised, then pleased. "I would like that very much, though you do not owe me anything." "Maybe not, but I would like to do it anyway," Willa insisted. She gave him directions to the small house she shared with her mother on the edge of town. "Come at 6 o'clock if that suits you." 6 o'clock, Rafe agreed. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that seemed oddly formal given his appearance. "I will be there, Miss Sutton." "Willa," she corrected with a smile. "If I am to call you Rafe, you must call me Willa." His lips quirked in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Willa, then. I will see you tomorrow." Willa watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him quickly toward the main street. Only when he disappeared from view did she realize she was still smiling. Shaking her head at herself, she went inside to face Mr. Henderson's questions about her prolonged absence. The next evening, Willa changed her dress 3 times before settling on her best one, a deep green calico with a white collar that her mother had helped her make shortly after they arrived in Ardmore. She fussed with her honey blonde hair, trying to tame it into a respectable bun, but the Oklahoma heat and humidity conspired against her, leaving little curls escaping around her face. "He is just coming for dinner," her mother, Margaret Sutton, said with poorly concealed amusement. She was a handsome woman of 48, her light brown hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical style. "You are acting like you are going to a ball." "I want to look presentable," Willa protested, giving up on her hair and moving to set the table with their best dishes, such as they were. "The man saved me from a very unpleasant situation. The least I can do is make an effort." "From what you told me, he did considerably more than save you from an unpleasant situation," Margaret said seriously, stirring the pot of stew simmering on the stove. "He may have saved you from something much worse. I would like to thank him properly myself." Willa shuddered, not wanting to think too hard about what might have happened if Rafe had not appeared when he did. She had lain awake much of the previous night, playing the scene over in her mind, imagining various terrible outcomes. In every dark scenario, Rafe's intervention shone like a beacon. A knock at the door at precisely 6 o'clock sent Willa's heart racing. She smoothed her skirt one more time, then went to answer it, her mother watching with keen interest from the kitchen. Rafe stood on their small porch, hat in hand, looking scrubbed and presentable. He had trimmed his beard slightly and pulled his long hair back at the nape of his neck with a leather tie, though several strands had escaped to frame his face. He wore a clean shirt, brown instead of blue, and his boots were brushed free of dust. In his free hand he carried a wrapped package. "Good evening," he said, his gray eyes crinkling at the corners as he took her in. "You look lovely." "Thank you," Willa said, feeling her cheeks warm. "Please come in. My mother is eager to meet you." Rafe had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe, and once inside, his size made their small front room feel even smaller. But there was nothing threatening about his presence. Instead, Willa felt that same sense of security she had experienced in the alley, as though nothing bad could happen while he was near. Margaret came forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Oakley, I am Margaret Sutton. I cannot thank you enough for what you did for my daughter." "Please, call me Rafe, Mrs. Sutton," he said, offering his hand. Margaret took it, and Willa saw her mother's eyebrows rise slightly at the strength of his grip. "And it was nothing any decent man would not have done." "Nevertheless, you have our gratitude," Margaret said warmly. "Please, sit down. Dinner is almost ready." "I brought this," Rafe said, offering the wrapped package. "It is not much, but I thought you might enjoy it." Willa unwrapped the parcel to find a beautiful piece of fresh venison, carefully butchered and wrapped in clean cloth. "Oh, this is wonderful. Rafe, you did not have to do this." "I shot a deer 2 days ago," he explained with a slight shrug. "I have more meat than I can use before it spoils, and I thought you might appreciate it." "We certainly will," Margaret assured him, already mentally planning how to best use such a valuable gift. Fresh meat was expensive, and their budget rarely stretched to afford it. "You are very generous." They settled around the small table, and Margaret served the stew with fresh bread she had baked that afternoon. For a few minutes they ate in comfortable silence. Then Margaret began asking Rafe polite questions about his life in the mountains. Rafe answered readily, describing his cabin in the high country, the animals he hunted and trapped, the challenges of living alone through harsh winters. He spoke simply but vividly, painting pictures with his words of sunrise over pine forests, of tracking mountain lions through fresh snow, of the profound silence that came with true solitude. "It sounds lonely," Willa observed, captivated by his descriptions despite herself. She had never ventured far from civilization, could barely imagine the life he described. "It can be," Rafe admitted, "but it can also be peaceful. No one trying to cheat you, no one lying, no politics or social games. Just you and the land, figuring out how to survive together." He paused. "Though I will admit, coming back to town, I am reminded of what I miss. Good conversation. Fresh bread." His eyes found Willa's. Friendly faces. "How long have you been living in the mountains?" Margaret asked. 5 years, Rafe said. "Before that, I was a soldier for a time. After I left the army, I tried settling in a few different places, but I never quite fit in. Too much time following orders, I suppose. I got used to relying on myself. One day I just packed up what I needed and headed for the high country. Been there ever since, coming down for supplies a few times a year." "Do you have family?" Willa asked, then worried she was being too forward. But Rafe did not seem to mind the question. "My parents passed when I was young. Fever took them both within a week of each other. I had an older brother, but he died at Shiloh." His expression remained neutral, but Willa heard the old grief beneath his words. "After that, it was just me. I suppose that made it easier to disappear into the wilderness." "I'm sorry for your losses," Margaret said gently. "Thank you, madam. It was a long time ago." Rafe turned to Willa. "What about you, your father?" "He died last year," Willa said quietly. "Heart trouble. We could not afford the doctors, and even if we could, I do not know that they could have helped. After he passed, there was nothing left for us in St. Louis. Mama heard there was work here, so we came west." "That took courage," Rafe observed. "Moving to the frontier, 2 women alone?" "Or desperation," Willa said with a wry smile. "Though I suppose the two are not always that different." They talked long after the meal was finished, the conversation flowing easily despite the newness of their acquaintance. Rafe asked about their lives in St. Louis, seemed genuinely interested in Margaret's sewing business and Willa's work at the store. In turn, he told stories of his time in the mountains, some harrowing, some humorous, all fascinating to 2 women who had never ventured far from town. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Rafe finally stood to leave. "I have taken up too much of your evening," he said apologetically, "but I cannot remember when I have enjoyed a meal and conversation more." "You are welcome here any time," Margaret said warmly. "And not just because of what you did for Willa, though we will always be grateful for that. You are good company, Rafe Oakley." "Will you be in town tomorrow?" Willa asked, walking him to the door. The night air was warm but not oppressive, carrying the scent of prairie grass and distant wood smoke. "I will be," Rafe confirmed. "I still have supplies to purchase, and I thought I might look into finding someone to repair my rifle. The sight is slightly off." "You should speak to Tom Grant at the gunsmith shop on 3rd Street, Willa suggested. "He is honest and skilled. Tell him I sent you, and he will treat you fairly." "I will do that." Rafe hesitated, then said, "If you are free when you finish work tomorrow, perhaps I could walk you home. Make sure Preston Worthington is keeping his word about leaving you alone." Willa's heart gave a small, pleased flutter. "I would like that very much. I finish at 5 o'clock. "Then I will be outside Henderson's at 5, Rafe promised. He settled his hat on his head and nodded to both women. "Good night, Mrs. Sutton, Willa." "Good night, Rafe," Willa said softly, watching him walk away into the darkness, his tall form quickly disappearing into the shadows. When she closed the door and turned around, her mother was watching her with a knowing expression. "That is a very unusual man," Margaret observed. "He is," Willa agreed, not bothering to hide her smile. "And a good one, unless I miss my guess." "I think so too." Margaret studied her daughter's face for a long moment. "Be careful, sweetheart. He lives in the mountains. Men like that, they do not usually change their ways for anyone." "Mama, it was just dinner," Willa protested, though even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. "It starts with just dinner," Margaret said wisely. "But I saw how he looked at you, and how you looked at him. I'm not saying it is a bad thing. Just be careful with your heart." Willa nodded, but privately she wondered if it was already too late for such caution. Something about Rafe Oakley had captured her attention in a way no man ever had before, and she found herself counting the hours until she would see him again. The next day at work passed with agonizing slowness. Willa restocked shelves, helped customers, managed the ledgers, all while watching the clock and thinking about the evening ahead. Preston did not appear, which was a relief, but also slightly surprising. She had half expected him to return, perhaps with his father or the sheriff, making trouble over Rafe's intervention. The fact that he stayed away suggested that Rafe's warning had truly frightened him. Mr. Henderson, a stout man in his 50s with a perpetually worried expression, noticed her distraction. "You all right, Miss Sutton? You've been checking that clock every 5 minutes." "I'm fine, Mr. Henderson," Willa assured him. "Just eager to get home, I suppose." "Well, you have been working hard. Why do not you go ahead and leave now? It is only 10 minutes until 5, and it's been slow all afternoon." Willa did not need to be told twice. She untied her apron, collected her small bag, and headed for the front door, calling her thanks to Mr. Henderson as she went. She stepped outside into the late afternoon sun, and immediately spotted Rafe leaning against the post across the street, his arms crossed over his broad chest, watching the store entrance with patient focus. When he saw her, he straightened and crossed the dusty street in a few long strides. "You are early," he observed, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Mr. Henderson let me go," Willa said, falling into step beside him as they began walking toward her house. "It has been a quiet day." "No trouble?" Rafe asked, and she understood he was really asking about Preston. "None. I've not seen him at all." "Good." They walked in companionable silence for a moment, then Rafe asked, "Did you have a pleasant day otherwise?" Willa laughed. "Restocking shelves and tallying figures is hardly what I would call pleasant, but it was fine. Better for knowing I would see you this evening." She was surprised by her own boldness, but Rafe's expression warmed. "I felt the same," he admitted. "I spent most of the day thinking about how the hours were passing too slowly." They talked as they walked, the conversation as easy as it had been the night before. Rafe told her about his visit to the gunsmith, who had indeed fixed his rifle sight and charged a fair price. Willa told him about an amusing incident at the store involving a confused customer and a misidentified can of peaches. It was all ordinary, mundane even, but Willa could not remember ever enjoying such simple conversation more. They were nearly to her house when a familiar voice called out behind them, "Miss Sutton, a word, please." Willa turned to see Gerald Worthington hurrying toward them, his considerable bulk making the effort difficult in the heat. Preston's father was a large man who had clearly once been strong, but had long since turned to fat. His expensive suit was tailored to minimize his size, but nothing could hide the multiple chins or the way he wheezed as he walked quickly. His face was red and sweating, and his expression was thunderous. "Mr. Worthington," Willa said warily. Beside her she felt Rafe tense, his entire posture shifting subtly into something more alert, more dangerous. "I want to speak with you about the incident involving my son," Worthington panted, pulling a handkerchief from his pocket to mop his face. His small, hard eyes flickered to Rafe, then away, as though dismissing him as unimportant. "Preston has told me a wild story about being attacked in an alley by some mountain savage. I am certain there has been a misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," Willa said, keeping her voice level despite the anger building in her chest. "Your son cornered me in an alley and tried to force himself on me. This man," she gestured to Rafe, "intervened and told Preston to leave me alone." "That is not how Preston tells it," Worthington blustered. "He says he was having a friendly conversation with you when this ruffian attacked him without provocation." "Then your son is a liar, as well as a predator," Rafe said quietly, his deep voice cutting through Worthington's bluster like a knife. "I saw what happened. He had her pinned against a wall, trying to force a kiss on her while she struggled and told him no. There was nothing friendly about it." Worthington's face darkened further. "How dare you speak to me that way? Do you know who I am?" "You are the father of a man who thinks his money gives him the right to assault women," Rafe said, his tone conversational but his eyes hard as flint. "That's all I need to know about you." "I will have you arrested," Worthington sputtered. "I will have you run out of town." "On what charge?" Rafe asked. "Defending a woman from your son? I imagine most people in this town would be very interested to hear the details of what really happened in that alley." Worthington fell silent, clearly calculating. Willa understood the problem he faced. If this became public knowledge, it would damage his reputation and, more importantly, his business. The frontier might be rough, but even here, men who forced themselves on unwilling women were looked down upon. Other problems could be overlooked, but this particular failing was hard to excuse, even for a man as powerful as Worthington. "I am certain we can come to some arrangement," Worthington said finally, his tone shifting to one of false reasonableness. "You are new in town, are you not? Perhaps you misunderstood what you saw. Preston can be overly friendly at times, but he means no harm. If you were willing to admit your mistake, I would be willing to make it worth your while. Say, $50 for your trouble." "I am not for sale," Rafe said flatly, "and neither is the truth. Your son assaulted Miss Sutton. I stopped him. That is what happened, and no amount of money will change my story." $100, then, Worthington pressed. "That is more than you probably make in a year, living up in the mountains." "You could offer me $1,000 and my answer would be the same," Rafe said. "Now, if you are finished insulting both me and Miss Sutton, we will be on our way." Worthington's expression turned ugly. "You are making a mistake. I own half this town. I can make your life very difficult." "I do not live in your town," Rafe pointed out. "I live in the mountains, where your money and influence mean nothing. You cannot touch me, Mr. Worthington. But I can touch your son if he goes near Miss Sutton again. Remember that." He placed a gentle hand on the small of Willa's back, guiding her past Worthington. She went willingly, her heart pounding but her head held high. Behind them, Worthington called out threats and warnings, but neither of them looked back. "That was probably not wise," Willa said once they were out of earshot. "He meant it when he said he owns half the town. He could make things very difficult for me and my mother." "I will not let him," Rafe said with quiet certainty. "If he tries anything, I will make sure everyone in Ardmore knows exactly why. Men like Worthington, their power depends on people being afraid of them. Once that fear is gone, they have nothing." "You are not afraid of him," Willa observed. "No," Rafe agreed simply. "I have faced down wolves, bears, and hostile territory. A fat banker with delusions of power does not frighten me." Despite her worry, Willa had to laugh. "You really have no fear, do you?" "Everyone has fear," Rafe said, "but I choose which things are worth being afraid of, and Gerald Worthington is not one of them." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "I am sorry if I have made trouble for you." "You have not," Willa said firmly. "You have only told the truth, and if that causes trouble, the fault lies with the Worthingtons, not with you." They reached her house, and Willa hesitated before going inside. "Would you like to come in? I'm sure Mama would not mind." "I should probably go," Rafe said, though he sounded reluctant. "But I will come by the store tomorrow to check on you, make sure the Worthingtons have not caused any trouble." "I would like that," Willa said softly. She looked up at him, this strong, honorable man who had appeared in her life so unexpectedly. "Thank you, Rafe, for everything." "You do not need to keep thanking me, Willa," he said, his gray eyes warm as they met hers. "I did what any decent man would do. Though I confess my motivations have become somewhat less altruistic." "What do you mean?" "At first I helped you because it was the right thing to do," Rafe explained. "But now I find myself wanting to protect you for entirely different reasons. Selfish reasons." Willa's breath caught. "What reasons?" Rafe reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked an escaped curl behind her ear. His fingers were rough with calluses but impossibly gentle. "I think you know," he said quietly. "I have only known you 2 days, but I find myself thinking about you constantly, wondering what you are doing, if you are safe, when I will see you again. It is not a feeling I am accustomed to." "I have been thinking about you too," Willa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it is foolish. We barely know each other." "Sometimes knowing comes quick," Rafe said. "In the mountains you learn to trust your instincts, to recognize what is real and what is not. And this," he gestured between them, "this feels real to me." "To me as well," Willa said. Her heart was racing, but not with fear this time, with possibility, with hope, with feelings she was almost afraid to name. Rafe smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him look younger, less careworn. "Then perhaps we should see where this leads, if you are willing." "I am willing," Willa said, returning his smile. "Very willing." "Good." Rafe stepped back reluctantly. "I will see you tomorrow then. Sleep well, Willa." "You too, Rafe." She watched him walk away again, and this time when she went inside, her mother took one look at her face and started laughing. "Oh, sweetheart, you have it bad." "I know," Willa said, but she was smiling. "Is that terrible?" "No," Margaret said, pulling her daughter into a hug. "It is wonderful. Terrifying, but wonderful. That is what love is supposed to feel like." Over the next week, Rafe became a fixture in Willa's daily routine. He walked her to work in the mornings and home again in the evenings. He took his meals with Willa and her mother more often than not, insisting on paying for his food with fresh game or helping with repairs around their small house. He fixed their leaking roof, repaired the front steps, and built Margaret a shelf for her sewing supplies, all without being asked. "He is courting you," Margaret observed one evening after Rafe had left. "You realize that, do not you?" "I think so," Willa said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "Is that all right?" "It is more than all right," Margaret assured her. "He is a good man, Willa, rough around the edges, certainly, and his lifestyle is unusual. But his heart is good. I see the way he looks at you, like you are the most precious thing in the world." Willa felt that way too whenever she was with Rafe. He treated her with a combination of respect and tenderness that she had never experienced before. He listened when she talked, asked her opinions on things, valued her thoughts, but there was also an undercurrent of attraction, of desire, carefully restrained, that made her pulse race whenever he was near. On Sunday, Rafe suggested they take a walk out to the creek that ran a mile north of town. It was a warm afternoon, though not oppressively hot, and Willa agreed eagerly. They walked through the prairie grass, talking and laughing, until they reached the creek, which was really more of a small river, wide and slow-moving, bordered by cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. They sat on the bank watching the water flow past, and Rafe told her more about his life in the mountains. "My cabin is small," he said, "but well built. It took me the better part of a year to construct it properly. One room with a sleeping loft and a good fireplace. Windows facing east, so I wake with the sunrise. There's a spring nearby for fresh water and enough flat land for a garden, though I have never been much for farming." "It sounds peaceful," Willa said, trying to picture it. "It is," Rafe agreed. "But lonely too, like you said before. I never minded the solitude much until recently." "What changed?" "You," Rafe said simply, turning to look at her. "Meeting you made me realize what I have been missing. Waking up alone every morning, eating meals in silence, having no one to share things with. I thought I was content with that life, but now I'm not so sure." Willa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I do not want to go back to the mountains alone," Rafe said. "I am saying that in just over a week you have become the most important person in my world. I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Willa Sutton, and I am not sure what to do about it." Tears pricked at Willa's eyes, but they were happy tears. "You could start by kissing me," she suggested, her voice shaking slightly. Rafe's eyes darkened. "Are you certain? I do not want to presume." "I am very certain," Willa said. "I have been waiting for you to kiss me for days." Rafe cupped her face in his large, gentle hands and leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When their lips finally met, it was like coming home. The kiss was tender at first, questioning, but when Willa responded, threading her fingers through his long hair and pulling him closer, it deepened into something more passionate, more desperate. They broke apart finally, both breathing hard, and Rafe rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know it is too soon, that we barely know each other, but it is the truth. I love you, Willa." "I love you too," Willa whispered back. "I think I started falling for you the moment you pulled Preston off me. You were like something out of a story, this strong, brave man appearing exactly when I needed him most." "I will always appear when you need me," Rafe promised, "for the rest of my life if you will let me." They kissed again, and then again, until the sun began to sink lower in the sky, and they knew they needed to head back to town. They walked hand in hand, neither wanting to break the physical connection between them. "I'm supposed to head back to the mountains in 3 days," Rafe said as they neared Willa's house. "I've been putting it off, staying longer than I planned because I did not want to leave you." Willa's heart sank. 3 days? "I know. It is not enough time." Rafe stopped walking and turned to face her. "Come with me." Willa stared at him. "What?" "Come with me to the mountains," Rafe repeated. "I know it is asking a lot. I know your life is here, and your mother, and your work, but I cannot imagine going back without you. I do not want to be apart from you, Willa. These past days have been the happiest of my life." "Rafe, I cannot just leave. My mother needs me. My job—" "I know," Rafe interrupted gently. "I'm not asking you to decide right now, but think about it, please. We could build a life together in the mountains. It would not be easy, but it would be ours. And I swear to you, I would spend every day working to make you happy." "I need to talk to my mother," Willa said, her mind spinning. "This is too big a decision to make alone." "Of course," Rafe agreed. "Take all the time you need. Well, all the time until I leave in 3 days anyway." Despite the seriousness of the conversation, Willa had to laugh. "You're not making this easy." "If it were easy, it would not mean as much," Rafe said wisely. He kissed her forehead. "Talk to your mother. Think about what you want, and know that whatever you decide, my feelings will not change. I will love you whether you are beside me in the mountains or here in Ardmore." That night, Willa told her mother everything. She spoke about her feelings for Rafe, about his proposal that she go with him, about the fear and excitement and confusion warring inside her heart. Margaret listened quietly, not interrupting, her face thoughtful. "You love him," Margaret said when Willa finally fell silent. It was not a question. "I do," Willa confirmed. "I know it is sudden, but I cannot help how I feel." "Love is often sudden," Margaret said. "Your father proposed to me after knowing me for 2 weeks. Everyone said we were rushing, that it would never work, but we had 30 good years together before he passed. When you know, you know." "So you think I should go with him?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "I think you should do what will make you happy. Rafe is a good man, and he loves you. That is more than many women can say of their husbands. But the life he is offering you would be hard, Willa. Isolated, difficult, possibly dangerous. You have never lived rough like that." "I know," Willa said. "But I have also never felt the way I feel with Rafe. Like I am completely myself, like I can be anything. He makes me feel safe and cherished and challenged all at once." "Then that is your answer," Margaret said gently. "Your heart already knows what you want. You just need to be brave enough to take it." "But what about you? I cannot just leave you alone." "Sweetheart, I have been taking care of myself for a long time," Margaret said. "And I will not be alone. I have my work and friends and a life here. You need to live your own life, not spend it worrying about mine." "Are you sure, Mama?" "I am sure." Margaret pulled Willa into a tight hug. "You have my blessing, if that is what you are asking for. Go with Rafe, be happy, and write to me often so I know you are all right." 2 days later, Willa stood in the general store and handed Mr. Henderson her notice. "I'm leaving Ardmore," she explained. "I'm sorry for the short notice, but something has come up." Mr. Henderson looked disappointed but not entirely surprised. "This is about that mountain man, is it not? The one who has been walking you home?" "His name is Rafe, and yes, it is about him," Willa confirmed. "We are getting married?" This was not strictly true yet, as Rafe had not formally proposed, but Willa had no doubt that he would. Everything between them pointed toward a permanent commitment. "Well, I cannot say I'm happy to lose you, Miss Sutton. You have been an excellent employee," Mr. Henderson said, "but I wish you all the happiness in the world. You deserve it, especially after what you have dealt with from Preston Worthington." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That means a great deal." "Have the Worthingtons caused you any more trouble?" he asked, concern creasing his forehead. "No, they have been silent since Mr. Worthington's confrontation with Rafe," Willa said. "I think they realized they would come out worse in any public conflict." "Good. That family has gotten away with too much for too long." Mr. Henderson hesitated, then added, "For what it is worth, that Rafe fellow seems like a solid man. Rough, perhaps, but with a good core. You could do a lot worse." "I could not do better," Willa said with absolute certainty. That evening, Rafe came to dinner one last time. He had spent the day purchasing final supplies and making preparations for the journey back to his cabin. Willa had told him of her decision earlier, and the joy on his face had been worth every doubt and fear. "I spoke with the preacher today," Rafe said over Margaret's excellent pot roast. "He is willing to marry us tomorrow morning before we leave. That is, if you still want to." "I want to," Willa said firmly, then glanced at her mother. "As long as Mama can be there." "I would not miss it," Margaret assured her, though there were tears in her eyes. "My little girl getting married. Your father would have been so proud." "You are certain about this?" Rafe asked Willa seriously. "Once we are married and in the mountains, it will not be easy to change your mind. I want you to be absolutely sure." "I am sure," Willa said, reaching across the table to take his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." The next morning, Willa dressed in her best dress, the green calico, and let her mother arrange her hair. They walked together to the small church at the edge of town, where Rafe was waiting with the preacher. He wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard again, but his eyes were what held Willa's attention. They glowed with such love and happiness that she felt tears prick at her own eyes. The ceremony was short and simple. They spoke the traditional vows, exchanged simple gold bands that Rafe had purchased from the general store, and sealed their marriage with a kiss that left Willa breathless and blushing. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said with a smile. "May God bless your union." Outside the church, Margaret hugged them both fiercely. "You take care of my daughter," she told Rafe, her voice thick with emotion. "I will protect her with my life," Rafe promised solemnly, "and I will do everything in my power to make her happy." "I know you will." Margaret turned to Willa. "Write to me as soon as you can. Let me know you arrived safely." "I will, Mama. I promise." Willa was crying now, the reality of leaving her mother truly sinking in. "I love you so much." "I love you too, sweetheart. Now go. Start your new life. Be happy." Rafe had 2 horses waiting, sturdy mountain ponies laden with supplies. He helped Willa mount, adjusting the stirrups to fit her shorter legs, then swung into his own saddle with easy grace. They rode out of Ardmore side by side, Willa looking back one last time to see her mother waving from the church steps. The journey to Rafe's cabin took 3 days of hard riding through increasingly rugged terrain. They traveled north and west, leaving the Oklahoma grasslands behind and climbing into the foothills of the Ozark Mountains. At night, they made camp under the stars, and Rafe showed Willa how to build a proper fire, how to identify edible plants, how to listen to the sounds of the wilderness. On their wedding night, alone in the vast darkness of the prairie, Rafe made love to Willa with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He was patient and gentle, attentive to her needs, making sure she felt cherished and safe. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Willa knew she had made the right choice. "No regrets?" Rafe asked softly, stroking her hair. "None," Willa assured him. "This is exactly where I want to be." The cabin, when they finally reached it, was exactly as Rafe had described. It sat in a small clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a view of the mountains rising in the distance. The structure was solidly built from logs, with a stone chimney rising from one end and glass windows that must have been difficult to transport to such a remote location. A small barn stood nearby, and Willa could see the cleared space where Rafe had mentioned a garden could be planted. "Welcome home," Rafe said, helping Willa dismount. "It is not much, but it is ours." "It is perfect," Willa breathed, looking around with wonder. The air was cleaner here, crisp and sharp with the scent of pine and mountain stone. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind in the trees and the distant call of a bird. She understood now what Rafe had meant about the peace of the wilderness. Over the following weeks and months, Willa learned the rhythms of mountain life. She learned to hunt and fish, to tan hides and preserve meat, to identify medicinal plants and predict weather changes. Rafe was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, and he never made her feel foolish for not knowing something. In turn, Willa brought her own skills to their partnership. She was better at mending and sewing, at cooking and organizing their supplies, at keeping their small home clean and comfortable. They worked together to build a chicken coop and acquire chickens from a trader passing through the area. Willa planted a garden in the spring, vegetables and herbs that would help supplement their diet of game. She learned to bake bread in the fireplace and to make soap from lye and animal fat. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done in town, but it was also deeply satisfying. At night, they would sit by the fire, and Rafe would read aloud from the small collection of books he had accumulated over the years. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories, dreams, and fears. They made love often, their passion for each other never diminishing even as they settled into married life. Willa had never been happier. She wrote long letters to her mother, which Rafe would carry down to the nearest town every few months when he went for supplies. Margaret's replies were always warm and reassuring, full of news from Ardmore. She reported that her sewing business was thriving, that Preston Worthington had apparently left town for parts unknown after one too many gambling debts, and that she was happy and healthy and wanted nothing more than for Willa to be the same. A year passed, then two. Willa's hands grew calloused from work, her body stronger from the physical demands of mountain living. She lost the soft, sheltered look she had brought from town, becoming tanned and capable, a true partner to Rafe in every way. And through it all, their love deepened and grew, becoming something solid and unshakable, a foundation upon which they built their entire life. In the spring of 1879, 3 years after their wedding, Willa realized she was pregnant. She told Rafe one evening as they sat watching the sunset, paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. For a moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, wider than she had ever seen, and he swept her into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of joy that echoed off the mountains. "A baby," he kept repeating, setting her down carefully as though she might break. "We are going to have a baby." "In the fall," Willa confirmed, laughing at his reaction. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased. Willa, I am beyond pleased. I am over the moon. I am—" He seemed to run out of words and just kissed her instead, deep and thorough and full of love. Rafe was attentive before, but during Willa's pregnancy he became almost comically protective. He insisted she rest more, do less physical labor, eat more meat for strength. He built a proper cradle from smooth pine wood and made countless trips to town to purchase things Willa insisted they did not need, but that Rafe worried they might. A doctor made the long journey to their cabin in the 8th month of Willa's pregnancy just to check on her, paid handsomely by Rafe for his trouble. "Everything looks fine, Mrs. Oakley," the doctor assured her. "You are healthy and strong, and the baby seems to be developing normally. I see no reason why you should not have a perfectly normal delivery." "That is a relief," Rafe said, the tension visibly leaving his shoulders. "Though I would recommend you come down to town when the time gets close," the doctor added, "just in case of complications." But when Willa's time came on a cool October morning, it happened too fast for them to make the journey. Her water broke at dawn, and the contractions followed quickly and intensely. Rafe, who had faced down wild animals and survived harsh winters, turned pale and slightly panicked. "I will ride for the doctor," he said, already moving toward the door. "There is no time," Willa gasped, gripping the edge of the table as another contraction hit. "The baby is coming now, Rafe. You're going to have to deliver it." "I have delivered calves and foals," Rafe said, forcing himself to calm down. "I suppose the principle is the same. Tell me what you need me to do." Despite the pain and fear, Willa had to laugh. "Just be here. Help me through it." And he did. For the next several hours, Rafe held her hand, supported her through contractions, brought her water and cool cloths for her forehead, and generally proved himself to be exactly the partner she needed. When the baby finally came, sliding into the world with a healthy cry that filled their cabin, Rafe caught his son with hands that shook slightly. "It is a boy," he said, wonder filling his voice. "Willa, we have a son." He placed the baby, still attached by his cord, on Willa's chest. She looked down at the small, red, squalling creature and felt a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. "He is perfect," she whispered. "He is," Rafe agreed. He dealt with the cord and the afterbirth with surprising competence, then cleaned the baby gently and wrapped him in soft cloth before returning him to Willa's arms. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at her son's tiny face, Willa knew. "Michael," she said. "After my father, Michael Oakley." "Michael," Rafe repeated, reaching out to touch his son's impossibly small hand with one large finger. It is a good, strong name. I think he approves." Baby Michael had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused eyes, already settling into the comfort of his mother's arms. Rafe sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Willa's shoulders, and together they marveled at the new life they had created. Over the next months, they adjusted to parenthood. Michael was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's light hair and his father's gray eyes. Rafe proved to be a devoted father, taking his turn walking the floor when Michael fussed at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just watching his son sleep, as though he could not quite believe the baby was real. When spring came and Michael was old enough to travel, they made the journey down to Ardmore so that Margaret could meet her grandson. The older woman wept with joy at the sight of them, gathering Willa and the baby into her arms and holding on as though she would never let go. "He is beautiful," Margaret said, cradling Michael gently. "Absolutely beautiful. Oh, Willa, I'm so happy for you." They stayed in Ardmore for 2 weeks, catching up on years of separation. Margaret's business had prospered, and she had moved into a larger house with room for them to stay comfortably. She doted on Michael, spoiling him shamelessly, and seemed genuinely pleased with the life Willa had built for herself. "You look happy," Margaret observed one afternoon, as they sat on the porch watching Rafe play with Michael in the yard. "Truly happy." "I am," Willa confirmed. "I never knew life could be like this, Mama. Hard but good, full of purpose and love." "That's all I ever wanted for you," Margaret said, squeezing her daughter's hand. "And Rafe is a good man. I knew he would be, but it is nice to have it confirmed." "The best man," Willa agreed, watching her husband lift their son high into the air, making the baby giggle with delight. "I fall more in love with him every single day." They returned to the mountains before summer, Michael thriving in the clean mountain air. As he grew, he became his father's shadow, following Rafe around the cabin and the surrounding woods with wide, curious eyes. Rafe taught him to walk by letting him hold onto his fingers, taught him to talk by naming everything they saw on their walks, taught him to be gentle with the chickens and respectful of the wilderness that surrounded them. 2 years after Michael's birth, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Rafe insisted they go to Ardmore a month before the baby was due, and Willa agreed, not wanting to put him through another home delivery if it could be avoided. They stayed with Margaret, and when Willa's labor started, the doctor was there to assist. Their daughter came into the world on a warm July evening, smaller than Michael had been, but just as healthy, with dark hair like Rafe's and eyes that would eventually turn the same deep blue as Willa's had been as a child. They named her Sarah, after Rafe's mother, and she completed their family perfectly. The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Michael grew into a strong, curious boy who loved the mountains as much as his father did. Sarah was quieter, but no less strong-willed, with a gift for growing things that made their garden flourish. They were happy children, secure in the love of their parents, growing up wild and free in the wilderness. Willa and Rafe's love never faded or dulled. If anything, it grew stronger with time, tempered by shared joys and difficulties, by the 1,000 small kindnesses and intimacies that made up a life together. They argued sometimes, as all couples do, but they always made up quickly, neither willing to let anger fester between them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Rafe surprised Willa by taking her to a spot high in the mountains that he had found years before, but never shown her. They left the children with a trusted neighbor and rode for most of a day, climbing to an altitude where the air was thin and cold even in summer. The view from the top took Willa's breath away, mountains stretching in every direction, so vast and beautiful that she felt tears spring to her eyes. "I used to come here when I felt lost," Rafe said quietly, standing behind her with his arms around her waist. "Before I met you, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted from life, I would stand here and look out at all this beauty, and I would feel so small and insignificant." "And now?" Willa asked, leaning back against his solid warmth. "Now I come here and I feel grateful," Rafe said. "Grateful that in all this vast wilderness, our paths crossed. Grateful that you took a chance on a rough mountain man with nothing to offer but his heart. Grateful for every day I have spent as your husband." Willa turned in his arms to face him. At 37, Rafe's face showed more lines than it had when they met, his long hair more heavily streaked with gray. but his eyes still held that same intensity, that same unwavering love that had captured her heart a decade ago. "I am the grateful one," she said. "You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me adventure and challenge and love and family. You gave me everything, Rafe." "You gave me everything," he corrected, touching his forehead to hers. "Before you, I was just existing, just surviving. You taught me how to truly live." They made love there on the mountaintop, under the vast expanse of sky, their passion as strong as it had been on their wedding night. Afterward, wrapped in blankets in each other, they talked about their life, their children, their dreams for the future. "Do you ever miss town?" Rafe asked. "The society? The conveniences?" "Never," Willa said honestly. "Everything I need is right here. You, our children, this life we have built. I would not trade it for anything." "Not even for indoor plumbing?" Rafe teased. Willa laughed. "Well, maybe for indoor plumbing, but that is all." They stayed on the mountain until sunset, watching the light paint the peaks in shades of orange and pink and purple. Then they rode home through the gathering darkness, guided by starlight and the sure knowledge of their path, back to their cabin and their children and the life they had chosen together. More years passed. Michael grew into a young man, tall and strong like his father, with the same quiet competence in the wilderness. At 18, he announced his intention to build his own cabin a few miles away, to start his own life. Rafe helped him, teaching him everything he knew about construction and survival, and Willa provided what furniture and supplies she could spare. Michael had met a girl in town on one of their supply runs, a practical young woman with a kind heart, and Willa suspected it would not be long before her son married and started a family of his own. Sarah, at 16, was growing into a beautiful young woman with her mother's determination and her father's steadiness. She had no interest in town life, preferring the mountains and the garden she had expanded year after year. Willa suspected Sarah would stay close, perhaps building her own home nearby when the time came, and the thought pleased her. She liked the idea of the family staying together, creating their own small community in the wilderness. Rafe, now 45, still worked hard every day, though he had started teaching Michael and Sarah to take over more of the heavy labor. His hair was more gray than brown now, and lines creased his face, but he was still strong and capable, still the protective, loving man Willa had married. And Willa herself, at 40, felt content in a way she had never imagined possible in her younger years. The girl who had worked in a general store in Ardmore seemed like a different person, someone from another life. She was stronger now, more capable, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. And what she wanted was exactly what she had. This life, this family, this man who still looked at her as though she hung the moon. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, their customary occupation after dinner, Rafe took Willa's hand in his. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "How could I forget?" Willa said. "You pulled Preston Worthington off me like he weighed nothing. You were like an avenging angel." "A very scruffy avenging angel," Rafe said with a smile. "I had been in the mountains for 8 months. I probably smelled terrible." "I did not notice," Willa assured him. "I was too busy being grateful that you had appeared." "I am the grateful one," Rafe said seriously. "That day changed my entire life. If I had taken a different route through town, if I had been 5 minutes later, we might never have met. The thought terrifies me." "But we did meet," Willa pointed out, "and we are here now, together with a life full of love and happiness. That is what matters." "You are right," Rafe agreed. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I love you, Willa Oakley. I have loved you since the day I met you, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you," Willa said, her voice thick with emotion. "My strong, brave, wonderful man. You are my everything, Rafe." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Inside, they could hear Sarah humming as she cleaned up from dinner, and in the distance, the sound of Michael chopping wood carried clearly on the evening air. Their children were safe and healthy, their love was still strong, and their life together continued, day after day, year after year, exactly as they had always dreamed it would. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Willa leaned her head on Rafe's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her to hold her close. This was home, she thought. Not the cabin or the mountains or even the land, but this feeling of being completely loved and cherished by the man beside her. Everything else was just details. "Come on," Rafe said eventually, standing and pulling Willa to her feet. "Let us go inside. It is getting cold." They went into the cabin together, hands still linked, just as they had walked into their future together 19 years ago. The fire was warm, their children were near, and their love burned as bright as ever. It was, Willa thought, as Rafe closed the door behind them, the perfect ending to another perfect day in a life full of them. And in the mountains around them, under the vast canopy of stars, the wilderness stretched on forever, wild and beautiful and free, just like the love that had brought them together and kept them strong through all the years. Their story had begun with a moment of crisis, a villain demanding what was not his to take, and a hero intervening to stop him. But it had become so much more than that single moment. It had become a lifetime of devotion, of partnership, of two souls finding each other in the vast wilderness and choosing to walk the rest of their path together. Michael married his sweetheart the following spring, and the wedding was held in the clearing in front of Rafe and Willa's cabin. Margaret made the journey from Ardmore, now white-haired and moving more slowly but still sharp and capable. She stayed for a month, delighting in her grandchildren and the life her daughter had built. "You did well for yourself, Willa," Margaret said one evening as they sat together, watching Rafe and Michael work on expanding Michael's cabin to accommodate his new bride. "I worried at first when you left with Rafe that perhaps you were giving up too much, but I was wrong. You gained everything." "I did," Willa agreed, watching her husband work with the same efficiency and strength he had always shown. "He is still my hero, Mama, every single day." A year later, Willa received word that Margaret had passed peacefully in her sleep. The news hit her hard, even though she had known her mother was aging and that their time together was limited. She mourned deeply, grateful that Margaret had lived long enough to see her grandchildren grown and happy, to know that her daughter had built a good life. Rafe held her through her grief, offering comfort without words, just his solid presence and unwavering support. "She was proud of you," he told Willa. "She told me so many times. She said you were the bravest person she knew, striking out into the wilderness to build a life with a man you barely knew." "She gave me her blessing," Willa said through her tears. "Without that, I do not know if I would have had the courage to go with you." "Then I am eternally grateful to her," Rafe said simply, "for raising such an incredible daughter and for trusting me with her care." They traveled to Ardmore for the funeral, bringing both children with them. The town had grown since Willa last visited, more civilized and prosperous. They stayed only long enough to settle Margaret's affairs and attend the service, then returned gratefully to their mountain home, appreciating anew the peace and simplicity of their life. Sarah announced at dinner one evening, not long after they returned, that she had been corresponding with a young man from a neighboring homestead. He was a farmer's son, hard-working and honest, and he had asked permission to call on her. Rafe interrogated Sarah thoroughly about the young man's character and intentions, while Willa hid a smile, remembering how her own father would have reacted had he lived to see her court Rafe. The young man, whose name was Thomas Grant, proved worthy of Sarah's affection. He was respectful, hard-working, and clearly devoted to their daughter. Within a year, they too were married, and Thomas built a cabin on the far side of Willa's extensive garden, close enough to help with the land, but far enough for privacy. Both children had families of their own in time. Michael's wife bore him 3 strong sons who loved the mountains as much as their grandfather did. Sarah and Thomas had 2 daughters who inherited their mother's gift for growing things and their father's steady temperament. The family compound grew, a small community of Oakleys and their extended kin, all living in harmony with the wilderness that surrounded them. Rafe and Willa grew older gracefully, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and long years, but their minds still sharp and their love still strong. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family grow and flourish in the mountains they had made their home. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Rafe stood and offered a toast. 40 years ago, I pulled a coward off a brave woman in an alley, and my life changed forever. I thought I was saving her, but it turned out she was saving me. Willa Oakley, you have been my partner, my love, My reason for everything here is to 40 more years. I will settle for one more day at a time, Willa teased, though there were tears in her eyes, as long as each day is with you. They celebrated late into the evening, the cabin and surrounding yard full of laughter and music and love. As the party wound down and their family headed to their own homes, Rafe and Willa stood together outside, looking up at the stars just as they had done countless times before. "Do you remember what I told you that day we met?" Rafe asked. "That I demanded Preston leave you alone forever?" "I remember," Willa said. "You were very intimidating." "I would do it again," Rafe said fiercely. 1,000 times over. Anything to have this life with you. "And I would say yes to coming with you 1,000 times over," Willa assured him. "Every choice I made that led me to you was the right one." They stood in silence, holding each other, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting from that single moment of crisis and courage. The banker's son was long forgotten, a footnote in their story. What mattered was the mountain man who had demanded he leave her alone, and the woman who had been brave enough to trust him with her heart and her future. Inside the cabin, the fire still burned warm. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witness to their love and their life. And in Rafe and Willa's arms, in the beating of their hearts pressed close together, was the answer to every question, the fulfillment of every dream, the happy ending they had earned through courage and commitment and an unwavering devotion to each other. They had faced the wilderness together and tamed it, not through force, but through respect and understanding. They had built a family, a legacy, a community of love that would continue long after they were gone. And through it all, from that first moment in the alley to this moment under the stars, they had loved each other completely and without reservation. It was, they both knew, exactly the life they were meant to live. And as they finally went inside, leaving the night to the mountains and the stars, they carried with them the certain knowledge that they had found what so many people searched for their entire lives, a love that was true and lasting and strong enough to weather any storm. The story that began with violence and fear had transformed into one of hope and happiness, of two people who proved that love could flourish anywhere, even in the harsh and unforgiving wilderness. The banker's son had demanded a kiss, but the mountain man had demanded her safety, her dignity, her right to choose her own path. And in that demand, in that moment of fierce protection, lay the seeds of everything that followed, a marriage, a family, a lifetime of devotion. Years later, when both Rafe and Willa had passed on peacefully in their sleep within days of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other for long, their descendants gathered to remember them. They told stories of the strong, capable woman who had left civilization for love, and the powerful, gentle man who had protected her and cherished her for over 4 decades. They spoke of the legacy of love and respect and courage that Rafe and Willa had left behind, a legacy that lived on in every child and grandchild and great-grandchild who bore their name. And in the mountains, in the clearing where their cabins still stood, maintained by loving hands through the generations, there was a sense of peace and rightness, as though the land itself remembered the love story that had played out upon it. The Wild West had been tamed, the frontier had moved on, but here in this place, the spirit of those early days remained, preserved in memory and story, and the enduring strength of the family that Rafe and Willa had created together. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though it had begun with such a moment. Instead, it was a story of quiet devotion, of daily choices to honor and cherish each other, of building a life together through hard work and mutual respect and an unwavering commitment to their shared future. It was a story of the Wild West at its best, rugged, challenging, but ultimately rewarding for those brave enough to face it head-on. And so their story ended, as all good love stories should, with a life well lived, a love well earned, and a legacy that would endure long after the final sunset. The banker's son had been nothing more than a catalyst, a moment of crisis that brought two destined souls together. But the mountain man who had demanded he leave her alone forever, and the woman who had been brave enough to love him in return, they were the real heroes of the story, the ones whose courage and devotion transformed a moment of danger into a lifetime of happiness. In the end, that is what love is. Not the absence of challenges, but the courage to face them together. Not the promise of an easy path, but the commitment to walk whatever path presents itself, hand in hand, heart to heart, from the first moment to the last. Rafe and Willa understood this, lived it, and in doing so, created something beautiful and enduring that would never truly die. Their love became legend in those mountains, passed down through generations, an inspiration to anyone who heard it. And whenever someone spoke of the banker's son who had cornered a young woman in an alley, demanding a kiss, the story never ended there. It continued with the mountain man who had demanded the villain leave her alone forever, and then, most importantly, with the incredible life and love that followed that moment of intervention. Because that is how the best stories work. They do not end with the crisis or the rescue. They continue, showing what comes after, the real work of building a life and maintaining love. And in Rafe and Willa's case, what came after was everything they could have hoped for and more. A partnership built on respect and devotion, a family rooted in love and strength, a legacy that would endure for generations. The wilderness had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately blessed them. They had taken the raw, untamed land and made it their home, not by conquering it, but by learning to live in harmony with it. And in doing so, they had proven that love, real love, can flourish anywhere, under any circumstances, as long as two people are willing to fight for it, work for it, and cherish it above all else. Their story, from that first dramatic meeting to their final peaceful days together, was a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to create meaning, to build something lasting and beautiful from even the most unpromising beginnings. It was a story worthy of the Wild West itself, bold, dramatic, ultimately triumphant, and filled with the kind of enduring love that makes all the struggle worthwhile. And so, in a small clearing in the mountains, marked now by the homes of their descendants, the love story of Rafe and Willa Oakley lived on. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected moments, and that true love, once found, can weather any storm and last for all eternity. Their journey together had been long and challenging and absolutely perfect, a shining example of what two people can build when they commit to each other completely and without reservation. The end had come peacefully for them both, surrounded by love and family, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved fully. And in the mountains that had been their home, their spirits seemed to linger still, a reminder of courage and devotion and the transformative power of love. The banker's son was forgotten, lost to history and irrelevance. But the mountain man and the woman he had protected, then loved, then built a life with, their story would endure, told and retold for generations, an inspiration and a promise that love, true love, can conquer anything.